All right, we have some time for questions for you guys, for the panel. But as you guys ask your questions here, you've heard about the size. We've heard from Mr. Franklin about issues concerning facilitation. We've heard from Dr. Hosein about issues that we need to be aware of, the precarious nature of informal workers and their situations, different types of workers that are involved, and the issues of rights. I'd like to open it up to the audience now for questions. We can take questions in round of 3. I see some hands up here. If you can get some mics there are mics in the hallway, so if you can just make your way to the microphone. And when you're asking questions, I ask that you be as brief as possible, to the point for your questions. And if you can also indicate the panelist to which you're referring your question, that'd be fantastic.
Hi, good morning. Very informative session. Dr. Hosein, you mentioned this in passing. How would you consider the gig economy? Because in the word develop...
What kind of economy?
The gig. Uber, Lyft.
Oh, I see.
It's these things that are on a gray area, because they're not really formal and they're not really informal. So that's a kind of area I'm wondering at in terms of the study and the impact, because Uber was here very briefly and then they left. And I see there's something called Trini Ride or something that's close to that. The second issue, I agree with respect to the health concerns and so forth. What is it with respect to what measures could be put in place for pension protection for those who work in the informal sector, because they would have these needs? Pension reform, how would we capture them? How would we treat them?
Thank you. Interesting conversation. An observation that I've always had, that I mean, any panelist can choose to address it. The informal economy seems to be, if taken in the right light, seems to be sending signals about the inefficiencies of the formal economy. In other words, if you take the PH drivers vis-a-vis taxis, licensed taxis, something has to be wrong where there is a demand for a service that is not being met by the formal system. And I think you can take that across the board. The exchange rate, you get a parallel rate or a black market rate or whatever you call it, because the formal rate seems not to be the right one. And I think it is a good signal, rather than, in other words, rather than policymakers seeking to, at the first instance, punish, if you like, those in the informal economy. The questions really are, what are we not doing right in the formal economy in respect of compensation, in respect of regulation, too many regulations, the bureaucracy. And those are the things we need to address, which one would think easily allow for more of the informal sector to get into the formal sector. But I also want to raise the issue, I don't know whether you have seen that. Yesterday we had the presentation by Professor Downs in respect of the ease of doing business. And I'm wondering whether there's some correlation between the growth in the informal sector and the ease of doing business. And of course the hypothesis being the more difficult or the more costly it is to do business, it is the faster or higher will be the growth in the informal sector. And again, it is really saying something to policymakers. You have some things to address there. That's it, Chair.
We had one more question before we turn it over to the panel.
Good morning. My question is directed at the panel in general. What are your thoughts about the potential of decriminalizing marijuana as a move towards integrating this informal sector into the formal economy? And what are some recommendations you may have to mobilize this change? Thanks.
All right, I'll turn it over to the panel. To Professor Watson, you want to?
Well, all right. I'll respond to Ronald and the young lady because that question was directed largely to Gabrielle. Yes, in fact, you said some of the things that we found, and that the highly regulated systems tend to discourage economic activity, if only because bowing to the regulation is at a cost. And the case of the taxis is a very, very interesting one. There are some routes, as you very well know, which are operated only by PH. For people like Andrew, the PH is a pirate taxi. It's someone who's driving a private car, P car, as if it were a H car, a car for hire. And I remember distinctly once the informal sector, certainly with the transportation, has become so respected that at one time, I saw riots up in Todd's Road. They're burning tires and so on. Why PH is going to raise their fares? You could imagine that they are aware that the PH taxis are going to raise their fares, so they are protesting, because they view the PH as something very normal. And if they didn't have the PH, they wouldn't get and indeed it is true. One of the reasons for that is that they have great difficulty. Some of them have difficulty getting the taxi badge. They probably don't want to pay for it in the first place. And it is true, I agree with it, that if you want to formalize the thing, limit the bureaucracy as much as you can. Now, sometimes it's good to protect you with the bureaucracy, yeah? But in some instances, it's punitive, and people don't like to take part in it. So much so that you remember under Jack Warner, he was allowing the PHs to function. I don't know if that still continues, as if they were normal taxis. In the case of marijuana, it's simply an extension of what the situation is. That is not only regulated in a normal civil sense, that's regulated as it's a criminal activity to plant the marijuana. And it could very well be for economic reasons that they are competing with well-established interests, both in the pharmaceutical industry and in the tobacco industry. I have often argued for the decriminalization of it because the places where drugs have been decriminalized, they have less problem with drugs and with people killing one another over turf and so on. And I am not sure. I see all these arguments about how bad marijuana is. I see some arguments about how good it is. But I do believe that they should deregulate it, decriminalize it in the case of marijuana, if only in a limited way, to make sure that the thing contributes to the economy. I am looking at the case of St. Vincent. We are actually studying the case of St. Vincent now. I don't think Trinidad and Tobago would benefit much from marijuana, because I don't think our stuff is demanded as much as the stuff of St. Vincent and the stuff of Jamaica. They are the two Caribbean leaders. They stand to gain. That is going to be how those economies will be diversified. We keep talking about Guyana, and it is true Guyana, through the formal energy sector, will probably do better. But the marijuana of St. Vincent is likely to do wonders for that country if people all over the world start allowing it, because they do very well. And it's a shame that they are being forced to pay a price because of the regulation, which is in this case the criminalizing of it. So yes, as a general statement, and I do agree with that, you want to bring people into the formal sector, and that is one of the findings we found, ease up on some of the harsh, unnecessarily harsh regulations. That's one.
Dr. Hosein, you have...
Yeah. So thank you for the question about the gig economy. It's not my area, but from my familiarity with the gig economy, it mimics many of the characteristics already present in the informal economy. So there's multiple arguments about it. A, it's growing. Hundreds of thousands of, something like 300,000 workers in Britain are involved in the gig economy. 24 or 25% of Americans in 2016 worked in the gig economy. But a number of things need to be kept in mind. One, the gig economy remains sex segregated. So when women enter, they enter primarily to do administrative, domestic, and care work. Men enter to do things like deliveries, transportation, storage. So men highly predominate in some of the massively growing areas. Women are in the gig industry or doing gig work, but the work that they're doing is not so different from the work that women were always doing informally to begin with. So you're giving a new, it's like, new wine in old bottles, right? And you're giving a name to something that, particularly in the Caribbean, we have a long history of calling informal sector work. The other thing is that there seem to be benefits for women. So for example, one is flexible labor. Women are able to lean in apparently and then lean back out, or to organize their hours around childcare. But again, when you are in informal sector work, in the gig economy, you are not able to climb, right? There's no upward mobility, there's no promotion, there's no increasing wages, and so the career path that has often been a basis for people becoming CEOs in companies and economic leadership is now cut out for those workers that are in that sector, even if they wish to be. So people say that the gig economy offers a chance to flexible labor for women, but it also cuts them out of a particular kind of career path in which women are the minority in economic decision-making, minority leading financial institutions, minority of CEOs, and so on, and puts them in this supposedly empowering informal sector, but which is really flexible but insecure work. As I've mentioned before, they also will probably not have access to maternity leave. That is 2 to 3 months of paid leave. They might have some kind of maternity pay, immediate small provision that they get, I forget the key word, but some of the basics that we are continuing to advocate for people, not just women, both parents, to have in the formal sector, such as childcare facilities, right? So, because we recognize that people are parents who are combining work and family life, sick leave and health benefits, as well as sick leave, health benefits, and vacation that are all paid. None of these are available in this economy, and they are particularly, therefore, not available to women. In other words, I'm questioning the extent to which they are as empowering as they are being claimed to be now, given that this is an old way of working for women that we know has not led to their meteoric rise in the global economy. Finally, there's a key thing, which is that two key things, which is that the role of bargaining for wages is highly ambiguous in these sectors. So you don't know what someone else is getting, you don't know how they bargain for those wages, and when the rules of bargaining are ambiguous, in general, those have worked against women, and that's what the data in that sector shows. And finally, they also show that sex stereotypes around labor, around hiring, around being the one who hires, and around negotiating such things as wages have worked against women's interests in the gig economy. But none of this should surprise us. As I said, you're using a new name for something that, particularly in the Caribbean, we are long familiar with. And I think recognizing the value of that Caribbean knowledge is very important. Just one last thing, but Caribbean sociology in the 1950s was dealing with questions that later on only got picked up by American sociology in the 70s and 80s, and in doing so began to now be championed as particular ideas around race and class in the economy. And often we ignore what's happening in the Caribbean as offering us solid historical knowledge for thinking about how those trends are then happening at later stages or at other points in other countries' history. And I think valuing the experience that we have, the long experience we have around the informal economy, helps us to really question these new economies like gig economies and ask how these were already constructions in the labor market, which we are long familiar with, and therefore can be at the forefront of not only theorizing, but helping workers to advocate within that economy for the kind of protections they need.
Thank you.
I just wanted you to... Yeah. I just want to deal with the issue of pension reform, which was raised by someone. Both Patrick and myself posed the question of, or brought to the discussion the issue of the role of microfinance. And let me say that it's not only microfinance that the participants in the sector would need. Recognizing you're dealing with a poverty issue, a significant poverty issue within that sector, there is need for a policy framework and for initiatives that would deal with poverty reduction. So in addition to the microfinance, you would also need to get these people into some form of a savings habit, as small as it is, but it has to be done as early as possible. And in terms of pension reform, from the savings, you then move to the next level where you are starting to put away something for your senior years. And so instruments like individual retirement plans now come to the fore. And so it's an opportunity for the unit trusts of the world and so on, of the Caribbean, to so structure those instruments that they become attractive to those folks in the sector. I don't think we have any disagreement with Ronald in terms of the need to look at the processes that are involved in the ease of doing business. The more difficult we make those processes is the more we push people into the informal sector. I think there's enough empirical evidence to establish that. The marijuana situation, I think you have to look at that also in the context of Ronald's earlier statement in terms of, as you address issues of the informal sector, you must face the issue of the inefficiencies of the existing economy, the formal economy. And you find that when you start to look at marijuana and the current system, you come face to face with quite a lot of inefficiencies of the formal economy and the formal legal system.
All right, I know you guys probably have more questions, but notice I'm running over time here. I'll invite, anybody has any last comments, statements? Okay, well, we hope that this conversation does not end here. It's something that is very important. Certainly, I mean, think about life without our informal workers in the economy, what life would look like, daily life would look like within this economy. It is something very important, and I hope that we've highlighted, on the panel, our members have been able to highlight some of the critical issues involved that we need to address moving forward. At this time, I'd like to thank the panelists formally, and I'd like to bring this panel to a close. Thank you.
Thank you.